Okay, this episode, and it has been remiss of me, a few people have said, hey, before you go on to clues left that day or missed that day, that fateful day in January 1966, and also to go on to circumstantial evidence, how about telling us about who is Harry Phipps? Let's paint a picture and set the scenes, and then how did he become that individual now known as an alleged serial predatory pedophile? Now, Harry Phipps came into focus in 2005, and that was because of a very good friend of mine is Alan Whitaker. And I've known Alan for about 40 years, over 40 years, and he was a author for John Wiley and Son, which was at that time an international publisher. And he had just completed the Wanda Beach murders. Now, when he completed a book such as this, or a true crime book, he would send it out to a few friends. I got a copy of this, and I knew about the Wanda Beach murders, not as much as I knew about the Beaumont children disappearance, because I wasn't born in New South Wales where the Wanda Beach murders happened, and Alan wasn't born in South Australia, so our hearts were in different places. However, I got the book and I called him and said, mate, if you ever get a chance to do or write about the Beaumont children, I'd be in. And he said, well, mate, I know that you were born there and you lived around the area, so look, I'll let you know. Now, the book, The Wanda Beach Murders, became a bestseller, and that was two teenage girls that were raped and then murdered in the sand dunes of Wanda Beach. Where's Wanda Beach? It's just south of Cronulla. Where's Cronulla? It's about 20 k's, don't judge me on this, 20 k's south of Sydney. And they never did find the person, but the book became a bestseller. Well, a week later, you would not believe it, I got a call from Alan and he said, are you sitting down? And he said, you wouldn't believe it, John Wiley and Son have called me and said, would you be able to write the first definitive account, you guessed it, of the disappearance, the abduction and disappearance of the Beaumont children? He said, Stuart, are you in? You know the lay of the land. I don't know it, but we've only got a short period of time. Now, why is that? Is when the publishers say, Alan, we want you to write about a book. You don't get much time. They give you a few months. So within a few days, we're on a plane and we were down to Adelaide. I knew the lay of the land. We got in the car. We drove around, of course, did Glenelg Collie Reserve. We did the inner streets of Glenelg. We did the suburbs, we did Adelaide. We also went to News Limited and we gleaned a lot of information from their newspapers back then. We went to the Adelaide Library and again went through the archives of a lot of newspapers. And also we got an introduction to the head of major crime at that time, which we're very lucky to do. Alan still has a great name when it comes to true crime in New South Wales. So one of the detectives got on the line and said, look, you know, these guys are doing some research, would you meet them? And they did, so we were very lucky to do so. When we did meet the head of major crime, he was a bit standoffish in my opinion. He was saying that there was lots of things written about the Beaumont children, there was lots of books, it's all out there, I can't give you much information. We did say to him that there hasn't been a definitive account written about the abduction and disappearance of the Beaumont children. Again, he was, to me, a little standoffish. He gave us a run sheet. That's what major crime basically give to reporters. And really what it got to me, what I understood is you guys know much about this case as we do. So we got that and we said, thank you very much. And then we went back home. And of course, Alan wrote a fantastic piece, the disappearance of the Beaumont children, called Searching for the Beaumont Children, and that you can see here, and it did sell very well. And I was lucky enough when he asked me, can you write the forwarding? And I did assist a bit on the research, but with the forwarding, basically what it is, not basically, it is, that is my childhood, which would be much the same as Jane, Anna and Grant Beaumont. See, I only lived about 4.5 k's from Somerton Park. I lived in a place called Seacombe Gardens. Anyway, the book was published about 6 months later. It came out in 2006, and again it sold very well because it was the first definitive account of the abduction and disappearance of the Beaumont children, which really is the #1 abduction and disappearance in Australia. I mean, it's that crime that really shook Australia to its core, and it's not only known in Australia, but it's known worldwide. Now, the book sold well, as I said, and of course Alan got a lot of calls, a lot of crackpots, but there was one in particular that sparked his interest. Again, Alan called me and said, "Mate, where are you?" And I said, "I'm in the office." He said, "You better sit down." He said, "I've just received a phone call from a lady who lives not too far from you that says that her father-in-law, or former father-in-law, and his name is Harry Phipps, may have something to do with this case." And she gave the reasons why. She gleaned some information within searching for the Beaumont children that she did not know. She didn't know the children received a £1 note from the man they met at the beach, or met at Collie Reserve. And she knew her former father-in-law, Harry Phipps, was known to give out or tip £1 notes in the 1950s and 60s. That she was also married to Hayden Phipps for a few years. And Hayden had said to his wife on a few occasions that he'd been sexually abused by the father. Also that he had a penchant for Satin. And she put this one and one together, that he handed out £1 notes. Then she gleaned that he did fit the description from what she gleaned in the book. So she put together that he fits the description. He could be he's an alleged pedophile. She did believe that Hayden Phipps was sexually abused, that he was known to give out £1 notes, but also what she said to Alan Whittaker, and he was really surprised. It really set him back. To add on to this, he lived 190 metres in direct sight of Collie Reserve. That sent a chill down my spine. No wonder he said, "Are you sitting down?" The same with Alan. He was like, wow, there is something really important here. Now, Alan had a lot of other books to do. He was he had to write he was in the employ of John Wiley and Son. He said, "Mate, I don't have time. She lives up near you. Would you help out?" I said, "I'll go for it big time." So I went up to see Angela Phipps. Now, I did meet Angela the following week, and I met her at a cafe north of Brisbane, and I found her overall in that conversation that she was credible, she was honest, reliable, articulate, and very intelligent. And I gleaned that she was a clinical nurse at the Palin Creek Correctional Centre. She was highly credentialed, and she did work with some of the prisoners, some of the inmates that was sexually abused, or said they were sexually abused when they were a child, and hence some of them would end up in prison. They would go and follow a life of drug abuse, small time and sometimes big time robbery. Some were left on the streets, and some ended up in prison, and she would work with them, so she was very well aware of the symptoms of the sexually abused. Now, when I met her and she was talking about Harry Phipps, and she always had some question marks about his behaviour. She knew about the Satin. She believed her husband was sexually abused by Harry as a child because he had all the symptoms, and we'll get into that later, associated with those of the sexually abused. The pound note really got her, and it's got most people. He was known to hand out pound notes, and as I'll repeat throughout these episodes, it was a pivotal piece of information in 1966, and it has been ever since.
Now, the children, after he passed by, the children walked across the road.
Across the road was a popular local bakery called Wenzel's Pie Shop. It would have been around here. And this is one of the mysteries of that day. Earlier at the beach, the children had lost their money. Yet Jane now pays for their lunch with a crisp £1 note, a note her mother had not given her when she'd left home.
The mother gave him 8 shillings and sixpence to get the lunch. Jane handed him a £1 note.
What did they buy with the £1 note?
The children bought cakes and a pie for the man. That's what they said, a pie for the man.
The kids said that. They were heard saying that.
Yes, they said it's the attendant at this shop.
That's when they disappear into thin air.
Yeah.
And so you add those up, and also where he lived, how goddamn close it was. The first thing I thought was, could it have been that easy? But anyway, Angela. I had to do reference checks. Now, in my employment, I run my own company. I do recruitment for hotels and resorts worldwide. Now, when you're dealing with senior people and you think, look, we've really got somebody good here, you're going to reference check them. So I said to Angela, I need to reference check you. I need 2 referees and I need to talk with them. Now, she gave me 2 written references there, and I'll read from one verbatim. But even though if people give me written references, I will still call the individual that wrote that. Just so happens, you don't want the person playing around with what's written on that reference. And that has happened to me a few times when you call the person and you find out what they're saying and what's written down is a little bit different. So this is the reference check, one of the reference checks, and I'll read word for word. To whom it may concern, Angela is employed as a clinical registered nurse at the Palin Creek Correctional Centre or Medical Centre. Angela has been employed in this position since 2000. During her employment at Palin Creek Correctional Centre, Angela has demonstrated to me she is totally honest and reliable person who displays a genuine empathy for clients in her care. This behaviour is reflective of her active sense of community insofar Angela has keenly sought and undertaken volunteer work for worthwhile community projects. Angela adapted to the challenging environment of the correctional centre very quickly and is able to prioritise her work to meet ever-changing outcomes. Angela's clinical assessments and skills are unquestionable, and administratively she produces work to above average standard. Angela performs extremely well under pressure and to deadlines, and has demonstrated on numerous occasions, given the volatile nature of her work, she performs above expectations. Angela is a valued team member, always willing to work in and is held in high regard by her peers and environment. I have no hesitation in endorsing Angela as a committed and valued employee and wish her continuing success. Now, the reason I've read that all the way through, it's important because Angela's name will come up a few times, and also one of the individuals, Hayden's younger brother, tends to poo-poo her and Hayden, but maybe she's after money, after revenge. This is why I've read this. This is the type of individual Angela is. I have reference checked other individuals, and I must say they were very interesting. Now, of course, I wanted to know, I believed what Angela was saying was true. Then she gave me names, addresses and phone numbers. Now, with this, why it's taken so long, to some people saying, why is it taking you so long? This is not a TV crime series where every domino falls into place. It's like a jigsaw, and they go, oh, so we got this, that fits, that fits, that fits. And they go, oh, that's him over there. It's not like that. It takes a lot of time. It took me 9 months to track down Hayden's son, and then another 9 months around that to finally get to meet Hayden, because he really didn't want to talk about his sexual abuse. But when I did meet Hayden, I walked away from that going, that is unbelievable. And may I digress a bit? With the grandson of Harry's, or Hayden's son, I needed to go through him for him to introduce me to his father, Hayden. Now, I got his address through Angela, and I might be digressing here, but it's very important. I sent him a book, Searching for the Beaumont Children, and I put a little note in, "Dear, is that I would love to talk to you about somebody that might be associated with this book." Now, I got a call after he got that, and I finally tracked him down. He called me, he said, "Hey mate," he said, "yeah, I can meet you, but I know what this has got to do with." And I said, "Well, what?" And he said, "My dad and my grandfather and the disappearance of the Beaumont children." Of course, he's got the book. I said, "Why did you say that?" And he said, "Well, my dad, which is Harry Phipps, said that he was sexually abused by the grandfather and that the children are buried in the sandpit." I said, "He said that to you?" He said, "Yep, he's always believed it and I believe him."
And you found Nicholas to be truthful?
I did. There is no doubt in my mind that he's in fact being truthful in relation to the conversation that he had with his father.
Now, when I got back to Angela, and she forgot to say this for some reason, but she said, "That's right, he actually said that to me. We were watching a program regarding the Beaumont children, and he said to me, 'I think my father had something to do with that. They're in the sandpit.'"
There are other people that do know certain things, but and having lived with Harry and know what went on in that family, a lot of people won't come forward. A lot of people haven't obviously come forward.
In our last story, Mr. Phipps's grandson Nicholas passed a lie detector test about claims made by his late father Hayden that Harry was responsible.
Now, he said it a few times. He said it to the son, he said it to his wife, and then when I met him, he said it to me, and later on we find out that he said it to Bill Hayes also.
When did Hayden first talk to you about the Beaumont children?
We were watching television one night and an item came on about the Beaumonts, and he said to me, "I always thought Harry had something to do with that."
Now, I believed these individuals, and let's say right here that Hayden was no angel. We knew that. In fact, when I met him, he did say at one point in the conversation, he said, "Mate, I was no angel when I was a teenager," and I said, "Yes, I've heard that." However, what he was talking about with his sexual abuse and about seeing the Beaumont children in his backyard, and we'll get onto that later, is that I believed he was telling the truth.
Hayden had his problems, obviously, but in relation to his telling of his own abuse at the hands of his father and the Beaumont children connection, do you believe him to be believable
Yes.
and trustworthy?
Yes.
Why didn't he come forward years and years ago?
Who's going to believe him? You've got a father that's a very wealthy man. He was a millionaire and he has influence. And he was a member of the Adelaide Club. Imagine the people he knew.
Harry Phipps lived until his 80s, dying in 2004. He was never investigated. 10 years later, Hayden, his son, died. A broken man.
Such a waste. I find the waste of human potential difficult, and in someone that I really loved. He was the love of my life.
Within weeks of this interview, Angela Fife also died. But in death, she and her ex-husband Hayden left behind damning testimony about his father, Harry Phipps.
Internationally accredited polygraph specialist and former policeman Steve Van Apperen has no doubt he was truthful after analysing a recording of an interview conducted by retired major crime detective Bill Hayes, an independent investigator for the Satin Man's authors.
They gave me more names. I went down to the cast alloy factory that Harry Phipps once owned. I got gleaned names from former managers from the 1950s and 60s, and I met them. They knew about the pound notes. He was always tipping in pound notes. They gave a perfect description of him in the 1960s. 6 foot to 6'1" tall, light brown hair, brushed back, parted to one side. He was athletic. He always swam at Glenelg, kept himself fit. And in 1966 or in the 1960s said he looked much younger than his years. And then he aged quite quickly in the 1970s, as you can see from photos here, how it progresses. And one of the Castaway managers, former manager, he was a great guy. He said, you know what, if Hayden was sexually abused, it would not surprise me, because the son hated his father with a passion, and he said you could not put it down to a workplace issue. Something was happening at home. Well, we can guess what that was.
Now, you told me before, we had a conversation before, and you told me that your father had sexually abused you.
Yes, violently.
Okay, so full sexual intercourse.
Yep.
All right, how long did this abuse go on for, Hayden?
Until I was 14 years of age.
3 times a week for about 8 years, which I'm assuming Hayden got big enough to deck his father, and that's why it stopped.
Now, things were starting to build. I was putting it in dossier form, as you can see here, and I passed it on to Major Crime. And initially, they were pretty receptive to what I had, because I corroborated it. And to take a step further, and I know this might alarm people, I did find, and I know I'm talking about myself a bit about the research, Bill Hayes is not on board yet, but he will be very soon. There's a few reasons. One, it started well with the Major Crime, it did, but then it dissipated over time until I was told by one detective, as I said, I was beating my head up against a brick wall. I sourced Harry Phipps's birth, death and marriage certificates, his real estate assets, his club memberships, which I found very interesting, especially his real estate assets, because some people were not aware of some of the real estate he owned. Now, I wasn't happy with Major Crime. I had this all together. I was recommended, I said, who is the #1 private investigator in South Australia? Because what I've got here is a shitload of information, corroborator, and it points directly at Harry Phipps. Bill Hayes' name came up time and time again, but they said, get all your ducks lined up in a row, because if you don't, you won't last long with him in his office. He's a great man, highly intelligent, but he was a detective in the South Australian Police Force. He has read and reread the official dossier, and he has heard every conspiracy theory about this case, so it can wear a little thin. And it may have worn thin with the detectives too, that like, here we're going again. But this was something very different. And of course, I met Bill Hayes around 2008, and I presented this information. He said, is it corroborated? And I said, yes. He gleaned through it. He found it interesting. He said, I'm going on holidays. And during the holidays, it was very quick actually. He called me and said, this is corroborated, yep. And I said, absolutely. And he said, I can meet these people? I said, yes. And he said, Stuart, this is the best information I have ever gleaned regarding a suspect, let's say a suspect in regards to this case. And Bill Hayes has been on ever since, and I really thank him for that, because without him, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you today. But overall, what myself and Bill Hayes had gleaned regarding Phipps, he had polar opposite public persona compared to his private life. He was an upstanding, successful businessman, well known in the local business community as a generous, charismatic, caring and charming. However, unbeknownst to many in 1966, behind the walls of his Glenelg mansion, close to Collie Reserve, was an individual who exhibited deviant sexual behaviour directed at children. He was an undetected, alleged predatorial pedophile, serial pedophile, who had uncontrollable Satin fetish, and this is just for starters before the main course. And as they say, where there is smoke, there is fire.
We're always looking at somebody that looked the part, but they don't look the part. They look like you and me, and in front of adults they act really well. It's only in front of the children they don't.
The truth is, you believe that the main suspect was hiding in plain sight.
Yes, and it's not the boogeyman. It's a person of influence, a person that's charismatic, a person usually in a position of power, of trust.
He was a pedophile, a according to his son, his eldest son. He was a man who engaged in serious deviant behaviours and would cross-dress in satin clothing, at which time he'd become extremely sexually aroused. I'm told to the point where he'd be uncontrollable.
But now let's look at who is Harry Phipps. How did he become the individual that he ended up being, a serial predatorial pedophile? How did that happen? Well, let's go right back. We've gleaned through the cast alloy factory, I've gleaned the complete history of Harry Phipps. Now, Frederick Henry Harry Phipps was born on the 1st of July 1917 and passed away on the 17th of February 2004 at the age of 87. He grew up in Glenelg in a house that his father Frederick built and named Isola, which is the Italian word for island. The home was and still is located on the corner of Augusta Street and Sussex Street, Glenelg.
A millionaire factory owner and father of two, Phipps lived close to both the beach and the bakery, where the kids bought themselves cakes and a pie for the man.
Now, basically, Harry Phipps was born and died there. He was a creature of habit. Harry's father, Frederick Phipps, married Katie Kitty Benbow Waters in 1919 at the age of 32. Frederick was qualified in electrical engineering, but his first love was geographical surveying, which took him away from Kitty and their newborn for most of Harry's formative years. Now, even when Frederick returned home, he wasn't there for long. I think that he was in the employ of the South Australian government, and he did geographical survey with them on roads and railways that took him into the outback of South Australia. Now, in 1917, gee whiz, you know, it would be, imagine the vehicles they would have had. It was very primitive by today's standards. So, of course, he would have been away for several months at a time. So therefore the raising of Harry was left to Katie, who apparently was disappointed in not having a girl, and so raised Harry as one for the first few years of his life. Now, I gleaned this information from several individuals or elderly individuals back in the 2008-2009 that have since passed that knew Katie. And they said Katie was allegedly known to dress Harry in garments made of frilly material, which appears to be the beginning of his lifelong obsession with satin material. Now, I'm going to go forward here a bit, because when I met the second wife of Harry Phipps, that was Daisy Ward, she changed her name to Elizabeth Phipps. When I was in the kitchen, there was a framed photo of what I thought was a young girl sitting on a tricycle. It was a very old photo, and they were in a frilly white dress. And I said, oh, who's that there? And she said, oh, that's Harry in his younger days. Now, it would have been Harry around 4 or 5, sitting on this tricycle. I thought it was a little unusual, not alarming, I just thought it was a little unusual, but it was definitely a frilly white dress. Now, going by what these elderly individuals said to me at the time, Katie was described as a very domineering, overbearing, demanding, controlling, authoritative, and a strict disciplinarian. Now, she ruled that household like a rooster, not like a mother hen. Now, Harry was schooled at Pulteney Grammar in Adelaide, arguably South Australia's most prestigious educational establishment, and he left at 16 to study at an industrial trades college for mining, engineering, metallurgy, mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. He was very intelligent indeed, and this is what you did back in the 1940s, 50s and 60s. You got to a stage at 16 years old, you weren't going to go on for further studies to university, you would join a trades college, you would learn metal work, you would learn car mechanics, or again, as Harry did, you know, engineering, metallurgy, mechanical engineering and the like. Now, once he completed his courses there, he joined Sagar Manufacturing, where he designed and produced an innovative grease gun that vastly improved the functionality of this tool. And due to this, the product sold very well and elevated Harry to a position of authority at a very young age at the factory. But you know, with Harry being highly intelligent, he's saying, well, hey, if I can make a lot of money for Sagar Manufacturing, how about I get a few of the blokes here, we get together and we start our own company? And that is exactly what he did. So Harry, with a few of his mates, they opened up the first cast alloy factory in Weymouth Street, CBD of Adelaide, and they started making metal castings for bread and ice cream tins, baking pans, saucepans, metal matchbox cars you can see here, and I remembered those when I was a child, and we called them dinky cars and the like. Now, something rather interesting happened. I had my mother down and she was staying down with us for a few weeks, and she brought down her trusty cookbook. And that cookbook is back in the 1950s. She takes it everywhere, really. That's how she does her recipes, which are absolutely beautiful. Yummy, as they would say. And there, right there, as you can see, is a full-page advert, cast alloy, Weymouth Street, and it shows you the products they were made. What a coincidence. However, with cast alloy being in the CBD of Adelaide, it was simply getting too big. So Harry, being entrepreneurial, he scouted the area at the back of Glenelg, which was still a lot of sand hills, and he settled on a large acreage at North Plimpton. As you can see here, you can see these are photos or images that I was given by the cast alloy managers that I met. They gave me the big, binded folder, and I took some photos, and I really thank them for doing that. And that's where the cast alloy factory started at North Plimpton, and that would have been back in the early 1950s. Now, over the decades, cast alloy became a very large concern and very profitable, and by the 1960s, Harry Phipps was a millionaire. And when I spoke to people, they said, yep, he was a big tipper. The pound note seemed to be his calling card. Now, at the height of its success, cast alloy was employing 500 people by 1999 and supplying car parts to the Australian automotive industry, and over the years producing for Holden, Mitsubishi, Ford, and in fact, Harley Davidson. Now, what myself and Bill Hayes found out through talking to quite a few people, it seemed that as his connections grew, let's say politicians, the business elite, senior members of the clergy, and in fact, the Adelaide CIB, he also became a member of the exclusive Adelaide Club and was frequented by members of the refined establishment. Before we go on further regarding Harry Phipps's sexual proclivities, firstly, he married Olga May Waters in 1942, and she passed away in 1994. They had 2 children. Hayden, he was born in 1950, and Wayne was 4 years later, roughly 1954. And according to senior cast alloy employees that I had spoken to and Bill has spoken to, the marriage to Olga was strained, distant, lacking affection and emotion. It seemed that Olga married for love. For Harry, it was to be able to maintain the facade of a happily married man. Now, this was a definite requirement for acceptance within the circles of the Adelaide business elite. Now, despite outward appearances, Harry was already plying his pedophilic trade. By 1954, he was allegedly sexually abusing his 4-year-old son, Hayden, and seeking out like-minded men who had a penchant for children and deviant sexual behaviour. And Myself and Bill Hayes will cover a fair bit of this in circumstantial evidence. What we found out about Harry Phipps's dark side was quite astounding. Now, I'll digress here a bit. Now, regarding this type of behaviour, in fact, in December 2010, South Australian District Court Judge Paul Rice said the reason some pedophiles of the cloth were able to prey on the young was that the church had swept this previous crimes under the carpet. They did with John Hepworth's sexual abuse, ably assisted by sections of the Adelaide establishment. Their continued silence further enabled the predator. Now, as Olga passed away, Harry Phipps needed to keep up this veneer of being a happily married man. So he put an ad in the paper, help wanted, and a lady called Daisy Ward, who changed her name eventually to Elizabeth Phipps, applied for that role and she got it. In fact, I was talking to the managers at the factory. It was a uniform garment factory that she worked at, and once she answered that ad and she got the job, she came back to the factory on the same day and said, I have struck the jackpot, and she quit then and there. So they said with Daisy, she had a horrific gambling addiction and she sometimes ran out of money because of that gambling addiction. So the managers that I knew said she was cock-a-hoop, and she became the maid or the helper the following day, and within a short period of time she actually married Harry Phipps. I mean, she had really struck the jackpot, because that's what she said to a lot of friends. She was after a sugar daddy and she found one. Now, as I said, Daisy Ward did change her name soon after to Elizabeth Phipps, and she could be seen driving around Glenelg in her new Mercedes. I mean, she has done really well for herself. As a few people described her as she knew how to play the game, and she played this very well. Now, this marriage, of course, was another sham, but in this case, it was a win-win situation for both parties. See, with this partnership, Elizabeth enabled Harry with her silence and by playing wife, and in return, she inherited the house, the land, and $1.5 million after Harry's death. And as Bill said, she had 1.5 million reasons to keep her mouth shut. Now, as Daisy's former managers at the garment factory said, Elizabeth bit off much more than she could chew, as the satin fetish was overtaking Harry and the rumour of sexual abuse was rife. I mean, she said after Harry was put into an aged care home, she had a few people take out the loads of satin from the house. And I'll call him Gary, he was the manager, and his wife. They were hoping that Elizabeth would assist with, they said there was a shitload of satin. There was a lot of it, but she disappeared and they didn't know where she went. And it took them quite a while to put all this satin in the car. They filled up the car and they had 2 trips. When she returned, they said, where in the hell were you? And she said, you have got no idea what I've got myself into. And they described her as in a distraught state. Now, when I was lucky enough to meet her at that residence, she feigned complete ignorance. When I mentioned the satin, nothing. She knew nothing of it. She was known. Actually, she called a relative to say, is it true the boys were abused? I mentioned that to her. She knew nothing about it. And also with detectives that went around to see her later, apparently she looked like she had feigned ignorance also with them. Now, Daisy did know about the satin, and it is alleged that she did ask, is it true the boys were abused? But as Bill Hayes said, she had 1.5 million reasons to keep her mouth shut. Now, before I conclude, you may be asking yourself, hey, hold it, you cannot tell me Harry Phipps making and wearing satin garments made him a pedophile, and you could be right. Yes, Phipps did have a satin fetish which appeared to stem from his childhood upbringing. His making and wearing of satin garments became deviant once sexually aroused. on many occasions directing this at his son Hayden, and myself and Bill would not be surprised if Harry Phipps also directed this sexual stimulation at other minors over the decades, as we will see later in these episodes and well documented in the upcoming book. However, this wearing of satin did not make Phipps a pedophile. For example, quite a few individuals purchase satin bedsheets, pyjamas and dresses, and they don't turn into pedophiles. Therefore we ask, is this pedophilia a learnt behaviour, or is the individual born one? Or is it nature versus nurture? Now, expert consensus is that one is born with pedophilic tendencies and is not a learnt behaviour. Neuroscientist Dr. Cantor explains when speaking with 60 Minutes Australia.
From all the science, from all your science, did it answer the question, are pedophiles born or made?
Interestingly, the science in general says that pedophiles appear to be born, not made. The stuff that we've seen that are different in pedophiles in their brain functioning is all stuff that doesn't happen during the course of life.
Are you saying that for the pedophile, their attraction to children is natural?
They experience it as natural. They did not pick it. They come to realize it over the course of life. The way that most of them describe it starts out like any of us. When they're, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, they get crushes on people around their age, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And then most of us, as we grow older, we continue to get crushes on and experience attractions to people roughly around our age, growing into adulthood as we grow into adulthood. For the pedophiles, however, when they start becoming 14, 15, 16, they're still getting crushes and finding themselves attracted to 8, 9, 10 years old. So it takes them until there's enough contrast between their own age and the people they're attracted to before they start realizing there's something different about them.
But also there is a cross-wiring of the brain that makes a pedophile view a child differently, as Dr. Cantor goes on to clarify.
That sex network, which is cabled together, is all cabled through that same chunk of connective tissue, which I found was different in the pedophiles. So it's not that these areas of the brain are different in the pedophiles, it's that the network that they're supposed to form isn't connected properly. So it's accidentally identifying things in the environment that should evoke a parental nurturant instinct, but instead it's provoking a sexual and erotic instinct, almost like a literal cross-wiring in the brain.
Because of this consensus, the medical community considers pedophilia a mental disorder. Another general agreement amongst experts is not all individuals with pedophilic tendencies, now that's male or female, act on their urges, termed the non-offending pedophile, who is less likely to view sexual activity with children as acceptable and may be more able to manage their responses to sexual stimuli. However, with Harry Phipps, this was not the case. He allegedly acted on these urges, which were heightened when wearing satin. He was allegedly inflicting this abuse on minors with no thought or conscious of the lifelong physical and mental pain they would suffer. His pedophilic gratification overrode all else. He was born a pedophile and he acted on these urges with impunity and no remorse. He was a wolf dressed in sheep's clothing. He inflicted a lifelong hemorrhaging of self-esteem on his son Hayden, where his world spiraled into one of alcohol and drug dependency, anxiety and chronic depression. Other survivors inflict self-harm and need to be hospitalised, to name a few. With Linda, another individual who accused Harry Phipps of sexual abuse when she was a minor, although coping slightly better, the abuse Phipps allegedly inflicted has affected her life greatly. Myself and Bill cover their heartbreaking accounts and more in the upcoming chapters in the forthcoming book, Unmasking the Killer of the Missing Beaumont Children. And that killer, we believe, is Harry Phipps. Over the next few episodes, I cover clues missed at Collie Reserve that fateful day, which for over 5 decades were not realised until now, that appear to indicate the individual that abducted the Beaumont children likely resided close to Collie Reserve. The other is corroborated circumstantial evidence regarding Phipps' deviant, dark, sexual, pedophilic side. When these two are added together, strongly appear to link Harry Phipps to this crime and expose him as the killer of the missing Beaumont children. Well, I think that's about it for me. I hope you found this episode intriguing. And if you did and want to find out the truth like myself and Bill Hayes, please like, subscribe and comment below. So until next time, I'm Stuart Mullins and I really appreciated your company.